Good morning, everybody. Give it a couple of minutes for everybody to file into the room before we get started. Got a good sized group today, so should have some fun.
Eli, just let me know when you'd like to get started.
Yeah, I think a couple of people trickling in, but I think we could get going now. If you're ready, we'll just keep letting people in as they come.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Managing Reduced Hours and Layoffs webinar sponsored by the Central Valley HR Hotline. My name is Sarah Valente, and I'm a marketing specialist here at CEA. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to go over a few details with you. Your audio will be muted throughout the presentation, but we ask for your participation in the chat box anyway. If you have questions pertaining to the presentation, you can type them into the question box at any time, and we will try to address them as we go. Handouts for this presentation were attached to the reminder email that included the link to this presentation. If you need them resent, please put your email in the chat box and we will resend them to you. Because your feedback is very important to us, please complete the survey by accessing the QR code at the end of the presentation. It shouldn't take more than a minute to complete, and it provides us with valuable feedback that we utilize constantly to constantly improve on our webinars. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Eli Nunez, our HR Director.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll take it away from here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today as we're going to talk about managing reduced hours and layoffs. As Sarah mentioned, this presentation is brought to you by the Central Valley Hotlines, and I'd like to put the slide up here with the numbers for you. Now, the Central Valley counties partner with California Employers Association, who we are, to provide this no-cost HR hotline for Central Valley employers. As you can see there on the right-hand side of the slide, there's different numbers for each county, and that just kind of helps us track where the calls are coming from and get to know each other a little better. So if you have any questions, whether it's about hiring and terminations, paid sick leaves, FMLA, CFRA, breaks, lunches, clocking, employee handbooks, anything like that, please give us a call. We're open during business hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And one of our HR directors will get with you and answer your questions. So as I mentioned, I am a part of California Employers Association, or CEA. Some of you may be familiar with us or may have taken part in some of our presentations before. And our primary goal as CEA is to bring employers peace of mind, right? We want to give you guys any kind of information. We have training materials, your recruiting services is something that we offer too. We offer our members unlimited phone support with HR experts, on-site assistance, a lot of other resources. Really, we want to focus on helping you with the HR aspect of your work so you can focus on growing your business, growing your organization, and focus on the day-to-day. Having said that, though, one thing I am not personally a lawyer, and even though we do have people with legal backgrounds on our teams, CEA is not a legal office. We should not be relied upon for legal advice. This presentation and any advice we give is from an educational purpose. So we'll give you the information, we'll let you know best practices. But if you have any topics that are of a legal nature, we ask that you call your personal legal counsel for a couple reasons. One, they are going to have your best interest in mind, and they're going to be able to give you, more specific advice than we will, depending on your specific situation. The other is that our conversations are not attorney-client privileged. In other words, if you have a conversation of a specific topic with your legal counsel, that can stay private. With us, not so much. So now that we said that, got the little disclosure, let's talk about our presentation today and what we will be focusing on. So today's training, some of the things we're going to discuss is the difference between a furlough and a layoff. And some employers use these terms interchangeably, right? We're going to furlough this person, we're going to let them go. And we're going to talk about what the difference between those is and why it matters. There's also specific notice requirements in certain situations, whether it's a furlough, a layoff, a shutdown, whatever it is. We're going to talk about when those requirements kick in and what you have to do to be in line with them. And then we're going to discuss some alternatives to layoffs, right? Sometimes, as we all know, if you've been in business long enough, there's ups and downs, and you have to do certain things to stay afloat, right? So we're going to talk about some things like reductions in hours, work share programs, telework options, other things you can do to avoid letting people go or layoffs. And finally, we're going to talk about some remote worker considerations, right? Remote work is something that really has come to the forefront in the last couple of years. So we're going to discuss it as an option to furloughs, layoffs, terminations or what have you, and also some things to keep in mind if you are engaged or engaging your employees in remote work. Right, so first let's talk about furloughs versus layoffs and why it matters. What's the difference between them? As I mentioned, sometimes, I've been with employers that want to use those terms interchangeably, right? We're going to lay off an employee for 2 days and then we're going to call them back, or we're going to, this person's not performing, so we're going to furlough them, right? And really, I mean, as I said, there's a difference in both of them, and let's see what the main difference is, right? So a furlough, a good way to think about it is think of it as a leave of absence, right? If you furlough an employee, you should intend to bring him back. It's not a permanent, termination, permanent layoff, so to speak. It could just be, things are really slow this week, or things are really slow for a month, so you're going to have to cut back their appearance or how often they are at your location or how often you call them, right? Now, again, it could be for a set period of time or it could be open-ended. And really, furloughs really came to our attention a few years ago. And everything seems like a few years ago. Is this pre-pandemic, pre-everything, right? When the state of California implemented furloughs for state employees. Some of you may remember they had furlough Fridays as a way to help with budgetary issues. So all employees were furloughed on the Friday. That means they had that Friday where they were not scheduled to work, right? So that's what a furlough is. It's like an unpaid leave of absence. You're just basically saying you're still my employee, you're just not working for this day or this specific number of days. And during furloughs, the thing to keep in mind is many employers usually continue group healthcare benefits because that employee is still your employee. So you're not terminating coverage and then restarting when they come back, terminating and restarting, that sort of thing. So a layoff, on the other hand, that is a separation from employment, right? If you lay somebody off, that means their employment has ended. You're taking them off your payroll, you're processing their final check. And really, you may intend to bring them back. You just don't know when. It could be never, right? So a layoff is really a separation, a termination of employment. And again, when you lay somebody off, you let them go. Usually, that could be the end of their medical coverage with you, dental coverage, whatever coverage you provide. So then they could be eligible for COBRA or Cal COBRA to continue that coverage on their own. So again, the furlough, good way to think about it is like a leave of absence, unpaid leave. You just putting them off the clock for a bit. A layoff means you're separating employment, right? Now, again, that layoff is a separation from employment. So when you lay somebody off, there are specific requirements that go along with it since it is a termination, right? So if you are laying somebody off, you do have to provide a change of status form to them, right? And this is just a form telling them, hey, your employment with us has ended effective, blank date, whether it's today, yesterday, whatever it is, right? You provide them that Form DE 2320, which is just a fancy way of saying that little blue booklet from the unemployment office that's for your benefit of it. That just basically informs them of what their rights are to unemployment. HIPP notice, that's that medical coverage notice, COBRA notices, and then their final paycheck. And this is something that we always go over with any caller, with our member when they talk about termination, right? When you're going to terminate an employee, whether it's a layoff, whether it's a termination for performance, whether you're terminating him for attendance, whatever it is, the minute that you are saying, we're terminating your employment, we're laying you off, we're letting you go, whatever it is, you should have that final paycheck ready for them at that time, right? And again, that final paycheck should include any accrued and unused vacation or PTO hours and wages earned up to that date. And again, if it's involuntary layoff or termination, that final check must be delivered on the same day as a termination. We like to advise, the minute or that exact moment that you say, you're fired or you're laid off or whatever, you should have that check within reach or on hand so you can, give it to them at that specific moment, not the next day, not the next payroll, but at that exact moment, right? And keep in mind, when it comes to benefits, that if you're not sure how benefits work in your company and you're the one in charge of terminations, contact your carrier, contact your broker to see when that coverage will end. In some cases, it ends immediately. Some cases, it ends at the end of the payroll period. Some cases, it may end at the end of the month. It really depends on how that is set up with your company. So make sure you're aware of that before the termination or separation, so you can provide them with accurate information. Now, if you find yourself in a position where you do have to lay off some employees, whether it's because things are slow, whether it's for any kind of budgetary reasons or what have you, here's our advice on how to do it. The first one is you're going to review your workforce, right? And identify what positions are necessary. And this is always difficult, especially if you're in an organization that's been around for a long time. You have many long-time employees. It's hard to separate, the position from the person, right? But really, if you're talking about the survival of your organization, you're going to review your workforce and see what positions are necessary, right? Once you decide what specific department or employees are being laid off, you're going to want to do it objectively. And you're going to want to document those reasons, whether it's the last person hired is the first person fired, whether it's, specific departments go first, specific positions, whatever it is, you're going to want to document that, and you're going to want those reasons to be objective, right? You can't say we're going to lay off, Cliff and Joe and Juan because they're old and they really can't keep up with everybody else. Well, guess what? Age is protected. That's not a legal reason for laying somebody off. So you want to be objective, right? And the reason for that is it helps you avoid any of those discrimination or whistleblower claims in the future. So again, even if you're being objective with your layoffs, you're still going to want to take a look at the group of people that's being affected, right? To make sure that you're not disproportionately affecting a protected class. So, if you go by just a set objective reasoning for it, but you find out that everybody that falls in that group is, of a specific gender, a specific age, a specific race or something, take a look at it, dig into a little bit further, because even though you may have objective reasons for it, you have to be aware of what the perception is, right? Even though you're being objective, if all the people you lay off happen to be, women, for example, you may have a claim against you. So again, just because you're being objective, you still want to go back and take a look at it one more time, at least before you go through with it, right? If you have, if you're going to lay off one employee in the department and they're ones that filed a complaint recently, that could also look bad again. So, again, we want to make sure we're taking a look at these things to make sure what the perception of it is going to be, right? And again, laying people off in the department just because they complained about a specific thing, whether it's safety, that could give the wrong perception again. So again, sometimes it's easy to use layoffs to get rid of employees that maybe we don't want there anymore. Maybe we just haven't documented performance issues or other issues. So we use a layoff as an excuse to do it. Again, we want to be objective with our reason why, right? Whether, like I said, it's the newest people that were hired, whether it's the lowest performers, and you could quantify that. Whatever it is, you want it to be objective and quantifiable, so it's defensible should you find yourself in a compromising position afterwards. Another term that's used sometimes to go with layoffs is a RIF, or reduction in force. And again, sometimes this is used interchangeably with the termination, right? Why are we letting this employee go? Oh, well, we're reducing the workforce. Well, a reduction in force really means is that you're eliminating a position or a department and you don't intend to replace it, right? So if you have, say you're in a manufacturing environment and you bring in a new piece of equipment that's going to replace a department that does the work manually, right? Then you're reducing the workforce because you're eliminating those positions and you don't intend to backfill them because they're being replaced by this other thing. So that's what a reduction in force is. You're either eliminating headcount, eliminating positions, you don't intend to backfill them once they are gone, right? Again, a reduction in force is a termination of employment, so operates like a layoff. All the rules apply. If you're reducing the workforce, you're letting somebody go because of that, make sure you have all the paperwork in place, final pay, all that good stuff. And again, be objective, clear, and document all the reasons why you're reducing that department, or those specific people, right? Again, you want to make sure that the reasons for doing it are legal and not, cannot be construed or seen as being discriminatory. And again, all those final pay notices, everything applies. One question that popped up here while we were talking, let me bring it back up again, is can a layoff be based on the highest paid? Can you say we're laying off the highest paid people? Again, this is something, I mean, it's doesn't seem discriminatory because pay is not a protected class, right? So if you're saying, in order to survive, we have to lay off anybody that is making above this a year, that could be a reason why. But again, you're going to want to do that side by side with taking a look at what those crucial positions are with your company. Just because say your chief operating officer is the highest paid person in the organization, does it make sense to let them go? It might. I mean, it depends on each organization. So again, really, if you're going by pay and using pay as a reason for laying somebody off, compensation is not a protected classification. So that could be one of the objective reasons. It's going to vary by organization. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, to circle back around the furloughs, again, furloughs, think of them as a unpaid leave of absence, right? And as such, people say, well, if it's a leave of absence, do we have to, give people final pay? Do we have to pay out their vacation? What do we have to do? And the answer to that is, well, it depends, right? Depends on the type of furlough. How long is it going to last? Is it just for a couple of days? Is it just for a week? What is it? So when you furlough somebody, I mean, some of the forms that could be that you're going to want to provide them, give them that unemployment, that little booklet, right, or the link to it, that DE 2320, that for your benefit, make sure they have that. And if you're ending any coverage, or if it's affecting their medical coverage, make sure you're giving them their COBRA notices. If it's not affecting it, scratch that last part, don't worry about it, right? Now, this final paycheck, if you notice the slide says maybe, it will apply. You will have to pay out that final pay if the furlough extends beyond the next pay period. In other words, if it's more than just, say, a week or just a couple of days, if you're going beyond the pay period with the furlough, then provide that final pay, right, at that time. And one of the things to think about, with the furlough is before you start processing final pays or anything, think to yourself, is there an end in sight to this? Am I furloughing somebody for a week and that's it? Or am I starting for a week and it could be longer? And if you think it could be longer, really take a look at it and see, if it is in your benefit, just to process that payout of any accrued wages, vacation, that sort of thing, right? Again, as far as benefits go, you may or may not continue it depending on the length of it and how your specific benefits are set up. If you choose to continue it, again, it's treated like a leave of absence. So in other words, you're still paying the employer portion of it, but the employee still has to cover their side of it, right? So they could do that by either, using some of their safe PTO to cover those costs, or they can cut you a check or what have you, but you can still ask for them to pay for their portion of it. And this especially, comes into play if it's a long furlough, right? If it goes beyond the pay period or something, then, there may be a pay period where they don't have any income. So they have to cover their side of the benefits one way or another. If it's just a couple days here and there, that may not even be a concern, right? Again, if, for a furlough, if you're furloughing somebody for, say, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, and you intend to call them back, make sure before the furlough starts that you have, good contact information, right? Current emails, addresses, phone numbers, and that you're providing these updates periodically. I've been in a situation where we furloughed employees because things were slow. We furloughed them for a week or two, right? So and we told them, we didn't give them a specific day. We didn't say, okay, we're furloughing you until, April 2nd. Come back on April 2nd at your regular time. We just said, things are slow. We're going to furlough you right now. We will contact you when it's time to come back. So make sure you have that good contact information. Now a question came up is if a furlough is for several weeks, must you pay out the PTO? And again, if it's beyond the next pay period. So if it's for a couple of weeks and it goes over a pay period, so you'll have a pay period where they're not paid anything, then yes, you would pay out any accrued PTO, wages, that sort of thing, or at least give them the option of saying, hey, we're going to furlough you for the next 2 weeks. Do you want to use your PTO or do you want to put in your PTO? We'll talk about that in an upcoming slide, where an option to furloughs or layoffs or anything may be to give people the option to take any of that PTO that they have saved up, right? Because if you think about it, if you're gonna have to pay it out anyways, you might as well just give them the option to burn it and get them out of the location for the time being. All right, moving on to our next slide. Sometimes furloughs may not be, a complete shutdown or completely sending somebody off your side or off your premises for a while. Sometimes just a reduction in hours, right? So for instance, a furlough could be maybe, you don't work for the next 14 days, right? But it could also be, hey, we're just furloughing you for 1 day of the week. And again, this is something we saw with the state of California a few years back, furlough Fridays, right? So for the next 2 months, we're going to furlough everybody on Friday. That means there's no work for anybody or for this department or for, this specific task on Fridays, right? Or you just reduce hours for the week. In this case, your employees stay on your payroll. They're still your employees, right? Which is good. Sometimes you don't want to lose your employees because you have to lay them off or because you have to send them home for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of jobs out there sometimes, so you don't want to risk, especially if you have a lot of valued employees, you don't want to risk losing them. So this gives you the option. So, and again, this could be required for all employees or just some. Again, you're going to look at these objective reasons to see why you're doing it and which employees you are doing it with. Something to keep in mind, though, if you are reducing hours, be very careful with your exempt employees, right? And also if you're doing, furloughing certain days or scheduling certain days, be careful with your exempt employees, because as we'll discuss later, it could affect their exempt status. So. But first, let's talk about your non-exempt employees, because honestly, when you're talking about reduced schedule, reduced pay, anything like that, your non-exempt employees may be the easiest ones to do it with, right? So again, for non-exempt employees, you can furlough them for the day, you can furlough them for part of the day. You could say, we're going to furlough you for 4 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, or we're going to furlough you for every Friday or every Monday or what have you, right? It could start in the middle of the week. And, basically, if you're non-exempt, you're only getting paid for the hours that you work. Makes it easy, right? You come in, you clock out, you're paid for those hours. And something else that we've gotten questions about is, well, can we lower somebody's pay? If things are specifically tight, can we ask somebody to lower their pay? Absolutely. It's not the easiest thing to do, though, right? Because, if there's one thing I've learned in my many years in human resources is, one thing you don't want to mess with is people's pay. But, sometimes it's necessary for the survival of the company or the organization. So in that case, yeah, absolutely. You can lower somebody's pay temporarily, but as long as it's still above the minimum wage. And that could be, whether it's a state minimum wage or the local, if you're in any of those municipalities with higher minimum wage, you always want to be careful that you stay above what that is. Now, when it comes time to reduce pay or reduce the schedule for exempt employees, this is where things can get a little tricky or a little sticky, right? Because the thing is, if you have an exempt employee that works any hours during a work week, they should be paid for that work week, right? We're not paying exempt employees by the day. We're paying them a salary for the pay period. So in other words, if you decide that you have to shut down your work, or you have to shut down your plant on Wednesday, and an exempt employee's already worked Monday, Tuesday, guess what? You got to pay them for the full week. So the only exception to this is, if they don't perform any work at all during the week, then you don't have to pay them for the week. But if they perform any work at all, it's got to be paid for it, right? So what can you do? Well, if you want to address a business disruption, you could temporarily reduce an employee's salary. So if you're going to say, we're going to furlough everybody on Friday, so we're only working 4 days a week, you could say to an exempt employee, hey, during this next 2 months when we're doing this, we're going to reduce your salary to X amount to reflect, the reduction or to reflect the furlough. However, you still want to make sure that this is just for a set period of time and doesn't fluctuate week to week. Because if it changes week to week, the argument can be made that, hey, you know what? It's changing in reflection to the hours that are worked. And if I'm getting paid based on the hours worked, technically I'm not exempt. So I should be getting paid overtime. I should be taking breaks. I should be, all kinds of things apply. So again, if you're going to do a reduction in pay for salaried employees, make sure that it's a straight reduction across the board, right? We're going to reduce your pay to this per week and for, for X number of weeks, and you stick to it. Question came up. Now, if you furlough salaried workers, will you still pay them their calculated hourly rate? And again, if you're going to furlough a salaried worker, if they perform any work at all during that work week, if they're exempt salaried, if they're exempt and they perform any work during that week, you have to pay them the full rate for the week. If they're salaried non-exempt, which is rare, but it could, still happen, then you can look to doing a breakdown. But if you're an exempt employee, basically you're getting paid for the skills and the knowledge you bring to the organization, not for how many days a week you're there. So, if you're going to reduce the pay, it has to be done by agreement that there's going to be reduced pay for a specific amount of time. All right, let's move along here. Again, for those exempt employees, and here's an example for you. During the crisis, if you have to reduce hours, during the crisis, you'll be paid 4/5 of your base salary. Your work schedule is Monday through Thursday, and offices are closed Friday through Sunday. Again, this is a reflection of what's going on with the furlough, but the base salary is cut basically consistently during that time, right? You're not saying, we're going to cut your pay or we're going to pay you based on how many days the office is open or whatever. You're saying, during the crisis, we're going to pay you 4/5 of your base salary. Your schedule is going to be Monday through Thursday. You're not saying which hours. You're not saying how many hours. You're going to say, those are going to be the hours of operation because the offices are closed Friday through Sunday. You're going to let them know ahead of time of any change in pay. People say, well, how much notice should we give them? That's a great question. The state hasn't really given us a specific amount of time. They haven't said, you have to give somebody 30 days. You have to give somebody, X number of days. The best practice is that you give somebody notice before the pay period starts that will be affected. So in other words, if starting next Monday's pay period that's going to be affected, you're going to want to let somebody know before they're in the middle of the pay period, right? You don't want to come back and say, oh, hey, by the way, all the hours that you worked this week, they're going to be at a reduced rate because, we're furloughing everybody. You don't want to go back and do it, backwards like that. You want to give them notice ahead of time. And again, be very clear with the expectations, let them know that they're still exempt, and make sure that they continue to earn at least a minimum salary for exempt employees in California, which again is 2 times the hourly minimum wage. So for 2023, your exempt employees, whether you're paying them a reduced salary, whether you're in furlough, whatever it is, they have to make at least what equates to $64,480 a year. We touched a little bit on a final pay, and the Department of Labor, the California DLSE, said that if a furlough extends beyond the next pay period or 10 days, you should treat it as a termination for final pay requirements. So in that case, you're paying the final check for the last day worked, right? So, we mentioned if it extends beyond the next pay period, right? And 10 days usually covers the majority of pay periods in the state of California. So why does it matter? Why should you do the final pay? Well, most of us have heard of what those waiting time penalties are, right? If you don't have a final check on time when it's required, then employee could be entitled to waiting time penalties until they receive that check. So, if you decide, hey, I'm going to furlough you for a month and, I'll call you later and, hey, wait for payroll to get your check. Well, guess what? If payroll is not for 2 weeks, then you could be on the hook for their average daily wage up until they receive that pay. So again, be very careful. Just know that, just keep in mind, if a furlough is going to be more than a couple of weeks, just treat it treat the final pay as if you were separating, right? It's not a separation, you're not giving separation paperwork. You're just saying, hey, you know what? We're going to furlough you for, 3 weeks or whatever. Here is all, today's your last day working. Here is everything you've earned up to date. Here's any vacation that you've got saved up, anything like that, paying it out, right? Unless you go with some other options that help prevent you from having to furlough people, which we'll discuss here in a bit. One thing I did touch on was some required notices if you're going to be doing layoffs, plant closures, that sort of thing. And these are WARN notices or CalWARN notices, because with everything else, there's the federal guideline, and then there is the more stringent California guidelines. Goes with almost anything that's got to do with work and labor. So basically, these WARN Act requirements, they apply for any organization with 100 or more full-time employees, right? And that's not just 100 or more full-time employees in the location, that's 100 or more full-time employees, period. California likes to look at the big picture, right? It's not just who works in California, it's who works for your organization. So basically, if you fall under those federal WARN requirements, what it requires of you is if you plan on closing a plant, doing a mass layoff, anything that's going to affect basically location or community, they want you to give at least a 60-day written notice to the employees of what is going on, right? Only exceptions to this, could be if there's any unforeseeable business circumstances, right? Earthquake hits, storm, plant burns down, that sort of thing. Obviously, things that you couldn't foresee, things that you couldn't plan for, then you would not be on the hook. But if it's something where, things are just going sideways with your business and they've been going bad for a couple of months and, you think you may have to close some things down or you've been planning for it, that can be seen as a foreseeable act. So you still want to give as much notice as possible. And again, if you find yourself in that situation and you have more than 100 employees, we recommend you consult counsel or call us to make sure that you are checking all the boxes and not getting in trouble for it. California, again, a little bit more strict, right? The federal was 100 or more employees. California reduces that number down to 75 or more full or part-time employees in the previous 12 months. So again, you want to give that written WARN notice as soon as practicable to any employees affected. California wants you to alert the unemployment office, the local workforce development board, and also the chief elected official of each city and county government within which a termination, relocation, or mass layoff is going to happen. So basically, the whole purpose of this is to minimize the impact on the community, right? If you're a large employer in a specific town and you're going to shut down that plant, they want the city, they want the unemployment office, they want the workforce development board to know ahead of time so they can start, doing things to help minimize the impact on that community. And new for 2023, there has been a change to requirements here. Previously, call centers did not really fall under the CalWARN notice requirements, but as of after Assembly Bill 1601 passed, if you operate a call center in California, and again, the same things apply. If you employ 75 or more persons in the previous 12 months, then you are subject to those CalWARN requirements for a mass layoff, relocation, termination, whatever it is. And again, that's if you're a call center now and you have 75 or more persons in the previous 12 months, then you are going to have to give that 60-day advance written notice to employees and the EDD before shutting things down, or you could be subject to some fines and penalties from the state. But let's get away from this doom and gloom a little bit. Let's talk about some alternatives. Maybe, shutdowns and furloughs and layoffs can be avoided in some situations, right? Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. So let's look at the alternatives to reduce overhead if you find yourself in the position that, things are tight, things are not going as well as they could be. So you have to take some drastic actions to stay afloat. So again, we discussed the first one, plant closures, right? You may have to shut things down, whether it's specific locations or the whole things. That's something that may have to be done. Reductions in force, layoffs and furloughs we talked about. But again, another option to a furlough, maybe you give employees the option to use any vacation or PTO. So if your workforce has a lot of employees that have, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of vacation saved up, maybe you give them the option, say, hey, you know what, things are slow. We may have to furlough some employees, we may have to shut down some departments. However, before we do that, we want to give everybody a chance to take some time off. The next 3 weeks are slow, so do we have any volunteers to take time off? And you never know, you may have enough volunteers where you don't have to implement any of those other programs, right? And if you think about it, I mean, if you're furloughing people, you're having to pay out that final pay, that vacation balance, all that stuff anyway. So if you have people that can volunteer to take time away and use their PTO instead, saves you a little bit of a headache there, right? Other options, you can have standby employees. So we'll talk about what that entails and what some of the risks involved. Shift reductions, maybe, maybe you consolidate shifts. If you're running 2 or 3 shifts at your workplace, maybe you cut down to 2 or to 1. You consolidate them. Some of the tools you can use there are the workshop program that is offered by the Employment Development Department. You can also, look to reduce benefits or use remote workers as a way to cut costs, right? And we're seeing this in a lot of industries or a lot of organizations. They're saying, hey, why should I be paying my lease? Why should I be paying for a building if everybody could just work remotely? And we can save that cost. We can save the cost of paying the energy bill for having the office open and just have everybody work from home, right? So again, no matter what option you're going to go with, we always recommend take a step back, look at what the big picture is. What do you want your organization to look like once you get past this crisis? What should it look like? What does it need to look like, right? So again, the first thing you're going to do is identify those critical positions. Who are your essential performers, your key occupations, and that's the ones that you're going to want to keep, right? And again, this is a very difficult part, especially if you're a long-standing, an older organization. You have a lot of devoted, committed workers with you. It could be hard to separate your longtime loyal employees from your critical positions, right? But again, this is one of those things that you have to take a step back and be very objective about, right? What are my critical positions? What are my essential performers that I have to keep? You could also look at workload and demand. Maybe some people's work has changed, and you can consolidate some tasks, or you can, break some things out, or combine some things. What does that look like, right? Being realistic with your annual performance target and budget. Be aware of what your business environment is, right? If everybody else in your field or in your field of business or where you're doing business is having a down year, is it realistic to expect that you're going to have a record year? Maybe it is. You could have unlocked the secret to success in that field, but just kind of be realistic when you're setting those annual performance targets and budgets. And again, once you set that budget, whether it's a good year, whether it's a bad year, whatever it is, we ask or we recommend that you keep revisiting it every few months at least to make sure you're on task, right? I mean, it's nice to set a goal for a year from now or from 5 years from now, but we always say, make sure you have specific landmarks along the way to know that you're heading in the right direction. So I mentioned, reduction in pay as maybe an option to cut things down. And I mean, it could be across your overall workforce, right? And different ways to do this. Again, you could shorten the work days or the work weeks. You can reduce overtime, you could eliminate overtime, that sort of thing. Or if you're going to reduce people's compensation, a good plan may be if you stagger it, right? Make it a little bit less painful, especially if it's got to be pretty drastic. Again, if you are going to reduce pay, give as much advance notice as possible. At the very least, do it before the pay period that's affected. But we ask that, you give as much notice as possible, because people also, just like you have to adjust your budget at work, people may have to adjust their budgets at home. So be very aware of that. For your hourly employees or your non-exempt, if you are changing the rate of pay, you have to provide them with a new, what's called the wage theft notice, right? And most of you have seen this. When somebody was hired on, when you hired on your hourly employees, maybe they fill it out and then we forget about it. Well, really, this wage theft notice form should be filled out anytime there is a change in pay. And that's a form that tells employees, what our pay periods are, how much they're paid per hour, what our workers' comp carrier is, what our sick time policy is. Basically, it's a form that the E2320 is a form issued by the state. Very easy to fill out. Also very easy to forget. So just make sure, if you're affecting an employee's pay, whether it's reducing, increasing, whatever it is, and they're non-exempt, make sure that you're filling out that form to go along with it. And again, if your exempt employees are affected, make sure that they stay above the minimum salary requirements. I mentioned having on-call or standby employees, as a way to deal with it. Maybe you're having employees be on call or standby for when you need it, right? Couple things to keep in mind with this. if an employee is scheduled to come to work and you told them, hey, I don't really need you right now. Can you just be on standby? Guess what? If they showed up to work because they were scheduled, or if you send them home early, they could still be owed reporting time pay. And that reporting time pay is for half of the scheduled shift or the hours worked, whichever is more basically, right? And if you look see from the slide, it's a minimum of 2 hours for reporting time pay, maximum of 4 hours. So, typically you schedule somebody to work an 8-hour workday. So, someone shows up, you owe them half of and you send them home an hour into their shift. Guess what? You owe them half of the pay for the day. So, better option may be, if things are slow, you ask for volunteers to go home. I guarantee you're always going to find at least one volunteer that's going to decide that they want to go home for the day, right? So, a good way to avoid that reporting time pay is to ask for volunteers to go home, because if somebody volunteers to leave, they're not owed it. If you order them to leave, they are. And when it comes to standby employees, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, are they controlled or are they uncontrolled standby, right? If it's controlled standby where you tell them, hey, you're on standby, you're on call, don't leave your house, don't leave the city, stay by your phone, or stay in the lunchroom until I call you, whatever it is, you're basically controlling what they do with their day. So that time is compensable. So be very careful with how you do the standby, right? If it's uncontrolled, they're not exactly on call. You just let them know, hey, we may need some people. So, be ready if I give you a call in case you want to come in or not. You're basically giving them the option of whether they want to come in or not, right? So unfortunately, we can't have it both ways. We can't say, you can do whatever you want, but if I call you, you have to come in. Because if you're forcing people to come in, it could be seen as, you're controlling what I do on my time, on my standby time. So technically that should be compensable. So again, it all comes down to how much control we have over that time. Okay. Next option was for reducing costs is to reduce benefits. And this could be, maybe you stop covering employees' families, right? Or if you have a tuition reimbursement, maybe you put a halt to that program. Gas card for your employees, maybe you call those back. If you have company paid vehicles and things are really slow, or you don't need them all on the road, maybe you bring them all back into your workplace and you park them, right? For a couple of reasons. One, you reduce the liability because they're not floating out there, and whether the employee may take them out to Home Depot on the weekend and get rear-ended or something. The other thing is maybe you can put some insurance on hold for that sort of thing. Same thing comes with cell phones, right? If things are slow, or you find that you don't need those cell phones that you issued, maybe it's time to call them back and either put the plan on hold or cancel the plans, right? Again, you can reduce bonuses or other fringe benefits. But just be very aware, it's all about how we present these options to employees. You want to make sure that they're aware of why you're doing it and what it means in the long term, right? I mean, it's very, very hard to get buy-in from people when you're reducing benefits, but if you've been transparent with them about the organization, about things that are going on, about the direction of the company, then it's a lot easier to get buy-in in those situations. Okay. So, we mentioned the paid time off as an option, right? If an employee, if things are slow, you give people the option to take time off, right? Hey, things are slow for the next 2 weeks. Anybody want to take some vacation? Anybody want to burn their vacation time? Does anybody want to take unpaid time off if they don't have vacation, right? If people volunteer to do it, it's not a furlough, so you don't have to go through all the hoops associated with it. One thing to keep in mind is, employees can choose to use their paid sick leave, their California paid sick leave during voluntary time off if they choose to, but we as employers cannot force them to use that paid sick leave, right? You can have a policy that says if you take time off, you have to use your vacation, but not your paid sick leave. So be very aware of that. I mentioned the work sharing program as well, and this is something that the EDD has in place. There's a bit.ly link there that you can see. And those bit.ly links can be a little iffy sometimes, but this is right off of the EDD website. So basically what it is it really helps employers to kind of organize their workforce if they have to cut back hours or combine positions, or basically work share. That means instead of having 2 employees that work 8 hours each, maybe they work 4 hours each and share the job, so to speak, right? And the whole purpose of this is retention is the big purpose of it, right? You're going to want to keep those employees working, even if it's at reduced hours with you, because sometimes they could supplement the hours that they lost through the EDD office, through unemployment, right? So in other words, if you reduce your payroll by say 20%, as the example shows, the unemployment insurance will pay part of the difference in wages. So it could kind of help to get employees and get you past that rough area, right? That little rough time. So basically the way the process works, and as with everything else, unfortunately, there is a lot of paperwork and documentation involved, right? So you're going to apply through the EDD for the work sharing program. And fortunately, I mean, one of the things that the pandemic brought was the government decided to expedite the process a little bit, right? So they, when COVID hit, there was so many issues with hours being cut and work sharing and everything, that they decided to streamline the process a little bit, which was nice. So, but still, I mean, there is still some paperwork involved. You have to sign up for the program as an employer to begin with. And then you have to provide your employees with a weekly documentation. There's something you have to fill out on a week-to-week basis for the work sharing program, right? You also have to create a memo, with details. Hey, we're cutting hours, and furlough here is used to say, the reduction of hours or the work sharing, with hopefully a start date and an end date as well. And again, just because you put an end date there, you can also state, hey, subject to revision or subject to change when that end date comes in, right? The thing is, during the work sharing process, if you're involved in it, you are going to continue any health care and retirement benefits under the same conditions as before, right? So that's another benefit of it, right? You don't have to reduce people's medical benefits or any of that. Another alternative to the work share is just some partial unemployment, and that's basically something employees can apply for if their hours are reduced temporarily, or you've had to, they've been placed on a layoff status, separation status, for no more than 2 consecutive weeks, right? And why do we say no more than 2 consecutive weeks? Because if it goes beyond that, then it's going to become regular unemployment. So basically, this partial employment program is basically like a temporary unemployment program, right? Now, the drawback of this, as opposed to job sharing, is that this could affect your unemployment insurance tax rate. As you know, if you have a lot of claims that go against your unemployment insurance, it could have an effect on you long term. Same thing with these partial unemployment insurance claims, right? So that is one advantage of the work share program. It would help protect you from that. So again, if you're going to participate in that unemployment program, you're going to instruct your employees to call the EDD 800 number to file that claim by phone, right? Or they could also file it online now. Make sure that they tell the EDD that they're participating in partial unemployment claims. They haven't been laid off, they haven't been let go, they haven't been terminated. It's partial unemployment. It's just for a short amount of time, right? And again, there's some links to those forms. The E2063 is the form that the employees are going to fill out and send into the EDD or complete it online. And again, I mentioned, it's a short-term thing, because if an employee has no wages or doesn't work for 2 consecutive weeks, then it goes from short-term unemployment to regular unemployment, and it becomes a regular claim of unemployment. So again, that short-term, that's really if it's only going to happen for a week, maybe a week and a half or 2. Anything beyond that just becomes unemployment. Another option besides, furlough, layoff, that sort of thing, if you really find yourself in a position where you do have to reduce that headcount, an option you can use is to offer voluntary separation. Do you have any volunteers that want to, terminate, retire, that sort of thing? And that could be something where, you say, if anybody volunteers to leave right now because of work conditions, or because of work reduction or whatever, then they'll be eligible for unemployment, right? I mean, usually if you quit a job, you're not eligible. I say usually, but in this case, you say, well, we're offering voluntary separation to prevent layoffs, or because layoffs are coming, or what have you, and that would help make them eligible for unemployment. So you could throw that option out there. Another one is early retirement. If you have a workforce that has retirement benefits or is eligible for retirement benefits, then you can offer that as an alternative to help reduce that workforce as well. Unfortunately, when that happens, you may lose a lot of experience in the workforce. So kind of weigh the options and see what works for you and what doesn't. Okay. Let's talk about remote workers too. As I mentioned, remote work is an option that some employers have used to reduce costs, right? Not paying not leasing office space, not paying for, power to keep the lights on, basically, that sort of thing. So thing to keep in mind is if you have remote workers and they are non-exempt, they still have to be treated as if they were in your workplace, in your office, whatever it is, right? So that means that they must still track their time, clock in and clock out, take all their meal and break times, as required by law, right? So if you are going to go to a remote model and you have hourly or non-exempt employees, make sure that you communicate this in writing, the rules, that they should record their time, they should take their meal and rest breaks, make sure you have a written policy to make sure that they're aware of this, that this is their responsibility. That way they can't come back and say, oh, well, I was working remotely and, I could never take my meal and break time. So I'm owed this time. So make sure that you put that policy in writing, have a remote work policy written and signed before you go to that model so employees know their rights and their responsibilities. And another thing to keep in mind is as far as local ordinances apply to where the employee is working from home. In other words, minimum wage and sick leave, right? We know some different locations have different requirements for minimum wage and for minimum amount of sick leave. So if you are based, say, for example, in Modesto, and you decide to go to a remote work with your non-exempt employees, and one of them moves to San Francisco, guess what? You have to pay at least the San Francisco minimum wage, and you have to be aware of what San Francisco's requirements are for sick time and make sure you're providing that. And as you can imagine, San Francisco tends to be a little more generous than the state when it comes to certain things. So just wherever your employees go, if you go to a remote work model, make sure you know where your employees are at all times, right? If they move out of state, guess what? You have to be aware of that because you have to be paying taxes at the right state and the right location. So always be aware of your employees are and always be aware of what the local ordinance are and know that those apply to your remote employees. Okay. Now, when it comes to exempt employees or remote work, this is one thing that makes it maybe a little bit, it's a little bit easier jump, right? Because again, we're paying exempt employees for any work they do, during the week, right? So if you do any work during the week, you're getting paid for the week. That's just the way it goes. We can't take partial deductions from sick leave or vacation if an employee only works, say they only work half a day because they have a doctor's appointment, or then you can deduct that time from any of those benefit times, sick time, vacation, or what have you. But the thing to keep in mind is that, if they use up all that vacation sick time, an exempt employee cannot go unpaid for a partial day. So if someone only logs in for an hour in the morning and then, decides, hey, you know what, something I ate yesterday isn't agreeing with me, I'm going to take the rest of the day, and they're out of sick time, they're out of vacation time, you still have to pay them their full wage for that day, for that week, right? Only exception, again, is if they don't work any hours during a work week, then you don't have to pay them for that work week. But, again, what is work when you're exempt, right? If you're checking emails, if you're responding to an email during the week, that could count as work. You can see on that last point, there is no de minimis exception. In other words, there's no thing that says, if you work less than 10 minutes, then it doesn't count. Or if you work less than 50 minutes, it doesn't count. There is no exception. Any work done during that week counts as work for exempt employees. All right, so let's talk about, what's next, so you decided, hey, we do have to make a change, right? Things aren't working. We have to do a reduction or what have you. We have to reduce costs. What can we do? Well, we're going to take a look. Do we need furloughs, layoffs, reduction in force? Do we need to go to teleworking? Look at all those options, and they're all there is no one option that's going to work for everybody, right? It depends on your organization, depends on your workforce, depends on your industry. Is it going to be the whole staff that we're laying off? Are we shutting down the location, or is it just a percentage? Always consider what are the essential jobs of whether it's for the location, whether it's for the whole company, whether it's for the whole organization. Always keep those in mind, right? Which jobs do we need to keep the doors open, to keep the wheels turning? Again, take a look at seniority. How does it play a role? How is it going to play a role in our decision? Are we going to use it to determine who gets laid off and who doesn't? Are we going to use it to decide, who gets their hours reduced and who doesn't? Seniority is a it is an option. I mean, it is something you can legally use to make determinations. It is an objective factor that you can use, right? As always, you want to make sure that your decisions are non-discriminatory, whether they're purposely or not, whether you're purposely or not purposely discriminating somebody. If it's discrimination or it looks like discrimination, you could be in trouble. So again, once you make a decision, take a step back and look to see, is it affecting a specific protected class more than others? Am I laying off, all women in my and no men? Am I laying off all people that are older and no younger people? That sort of thing. Just take a step back and see, if I were looking at this from the outside, if I were, looking at it from a perspective of a state employee, how would this look? All right. But let's get on the other side now. We've made it through. We made the hard decisions. We furloughed some people. Maybe now it's time to come back, right? Hey, we had to shut down maybe for a couple of weeks or for a month, or lay off some people. So it's time to come back. So what's the best way to do that? Well, some best practices are, hopefully you've identified those key positions. So you're going to want to return those first, right? You're going to want to let people know well ahead of time that, hey, we're ready to fire things back up. We're ready to start again. So, we plan to start everybody back in the office on April 15th or whatever it is, right? Give people a reasonable amount of time just to make sure they can make arrangements for the return, right? I mean, if someone's been furloughed for maybe a couple of weeks or a month or what have you, maybe they cancel their childcare, maybe they, left town for a few weeks or whatever. You want to make sure you give people enough time to make those adjustments to come back to the workplace, right? Or come back to work. You can consider a slow return, maybe start, part-time. Maybe you're not going back to, 40, 50, 60 hours a week right off the bat. Maybe you'll start with 20 or 30 or, just part of the workforce or whatever. And again, you're going to take a look to see what changes took place while people were out. Maybe, during those furloughs, you decided to combine a few positions or, combine duties or change duties or what have you. So make sure that, you're communicating those things, right? If you reduced any positions or eliminate any positions, make sure that you look to see who's going to take on those duties and you communicate that to the people that are affected, right? And again, any changes to the safety site plan, we saw this during the shutdowns with COVID, right? There was some changes when people came back. There needed to be some training on what the new COVID protocols were or what the new safety protocols were or anything. So if there's any changes, make sure you communicate those to the staff upon their return. There could be a great deal of retraining, even though you're only gone for a week or two, you could still have to retrain people, right? I hate to disappoint everybody. I mean, I stayed away from having a COVID headed slide for the whole thing, but we do have one here at the end. And the reason for that is, if you are in the hotel, private club, event center, airport hospitality, building services industry, there was SB 93 that passed a couple years back that basically said, if you have to lay off any employees due to COVID, and this is just due to COVID, then they have a priority when it comes time to rehire, right? So bad news, if you laid somebody off and because you didn't like them, but use COVID as an excuse or as a reason why, guess what? They're one of the first ones in line if you're hiring people to fill that position again. So again, this requirement stays in place until December 31st of 2024. So we got another year and a half or year and 3/4 of this to go. And basically, what it is if you have any employee that worked for you for 6 months or more in the 12 months prior to January 1st, 2020, when COVID started, then basically if they were let go, reduced, furloughed, laid off, whatever, because of COVID, then really they should have priority when it comes back to backfilling those positions. All right. Any questions about that? Please give us a call at that 800 number. If you find yourself in those industries or that situation, give us a call so we could talk through it. So some of the takeaways for today, again, whether you're in the layoff, sort of scenario or not, always analyze your workforce, right? Always be on top of it, see what changes need to be made. Look ahead, see who your key players are, right? Have a plan in place for a variety of possible scenarios, right? I mean, maybe have a policy in place in case you have to do layoffs. How are you going to do it? Again, are you going to focus on seniority? Are you going to focus on specific departments? That sort of thing. So just those plans can change, but just have the framework in place. That way you're not caught, without any kind of tools should the scenario appear, right? Decide what's best for your business. Again, every business, every organization is different. So, take a look to see what's going to work for you. Use any resources for assistance. That could be the EDD, that could be Workshare, that could be calling us, whatever it is. And again, give us a call with any questions. If you have any layoffs, terminations, hiring, any questions you have, about that, about this presentation, wherever it is, give us a call. Here are those hotline numbers for you again. These should be part of your presentation as well. If you have any questions, whether it's about terminations, layoffs, hiring, COVID, sick leave, vacation, whatever it is, give us a call. We will be more than happy to talk to you, get to know you, and give you some information that we can now. If you would like maybe more than just a hotline, we do offer memberships to CEA, a couple different tiers, associate, premier, and ultimate, each one of those with additional access, additional tools. Maybe you need some hours for a project, maybe you need a handbook, that sort of thing. These are the price per year, but also you can join as an associate on a month-to-month basis with a one-time administrative or subscription fee as well. So, if you're interested, again, give us a call, either at the 800 number or at the hotline, and we could talk about those options for you. Now, for those of you that are with us for your continuing education, whether it's SHRM or HRCI, I do have the codes for you, because we know, as fun as these webinars are, sometimes it's, we do it because we have to, right? So if you are have your HRCI certification, that's part of the education for it. The code for that is 617423. That's 617423. And if you're a member of SHRM and you have their certification, their code is 23-5PE4G. That's 23-5PE4G. And if there's one thing I can advise you, if you're in SHRM, do not forget that dash, whatever you do. It will not take the code without the dash. So as Sarah mentioned too, we do have a survey for you. Please let us know, what you liked about the presentation or what you'd like to hear more about, suggestions, anything like that. Take a picture of this QR code and let us know, what we can do to improve, what you'd like to see from us, anything like that, how we can help. So with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation. Any questions from anybody? I don't see anything in the Q&A. I think we may have had all that covered. So with that, I will leave the survey slide up for you. I thank you for your time and your participation, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.